welcome back to the deep dive. Before we even, open the dossier today, I actually have a direct request for you.
Right off the bat.
Right off the bat, if you value the kind of deep, no-holds-barred analysis we do here, the kind of stuff that usually gets buried by the algorithm, frankly, you need to hit that like and subscribe button right now.
Yeah, it really is the only way to support the show.
Exactly. It supports the show, and it lets us keep bringing you the material that, well, a lot of people probably don't want you to see.
And today's material is definitely on the do not discuss list for polite society.
Oh, absolutely. It's highly controversial. We are looking at a stack of sources today that center around a new ebook. It's titled Manipulation, Deceit, and Menses, Passing on the Woke Mind Virus from Matriarch to Mother and Maiden, and it's by Sophie Marie Eve Riker.
Yeah, and looking at the copyright, this is fresh. It's 2025.
Brand new.
And it is incisive, it's aggressive, and it's framed essentially as the manifesto for the modern man who looks around and feels like the game is completely rigged against him.
That is exactly the vibe I got. If you are listening to this right now and you've ever felt like the deck is stacked, or if you're ready to understand the history of our institutions before they were, in the author's words, captured by feminists and Marxists, this is the deep dive for you.
It's heavily targeted at that specific audience.
It is. Now, quick caveat before we really get into the weeds here. Our job today is to strictly map out the arguments made in this text. We are impartial here. We are not endorsing these viewpoints or taking sides.
Right, we're just unpacking the ideas contained in the source material.
Exactly. We're conveying the author's claims. And frankly, if you want the full red-pilled truth that we can only really summarize in this short time, you should probably just head over to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books and buy the book immediately.
Because it is a dense text.
Very dense.
And Riker doesn't pull any punches at all. We are going to cover the highlights, but the full argument is it's worth reading firsthand if you want the complete picture.
So let's unpack this central premise first. We hear the word woke thrown around constantly in the media. But Riker isn't just using it as a political slur here, is she?
No, she's positing something much more specific. She calls it the woke mind virus.
Right, the woke mind virus.
She is using a very deliberate biological metaphor. She posits that modern feminism isn't a movement for equal rights anymore. She argues it functions literally like a pathogen or a parasite.
That's a really heavy metaphor. How does she justify calling a political ideology a virus?
Well, think about what a virus does in nature.
It takes over the cell.
Exactly. It hijacks the host's cells. It rewrites the code to prioritize the virus's replication. And it does that even if it kills the host.
So she's saying the ideology does this to people.
Yes. Riker argues that this ideology hijacks the host, which in this case she identifies as women, and by extension society, and it forces them to prioritize grievance over biological survival.
Wow. Okay, so the viral veneer, as she calls it, masks the actual damage being done.
That's the claim. The mission of this virus, according to the book, is to pass on the ideology, even if it means the genetic line physically dies out.
Like it attacks the brain's control center.
The hypothalamus, specifically. She claims it reframes motherhood as oppression and corporate servitude as empowerment.
Which leads to what she calls a demographic winter.
Precisely. A society that just stops reproducing because the cultural software has been corrupted.
That is a terrifying thought to consider. But to understand how we got to this point, Riker argues we have to go back in history.
Way back.
Yeah. She does a lot of historical revisionism in this book, particularly regarding the suffragettes. Now, in school, I was definitely taught the Mary Poppins version. Peaceful ladies with sashes and placards marching for the vote.
That is the Disney version, yes. But if you look at Chapter 2, it's titled The Terrorist Tactics of the Suffragettes, and it paints a completely different picture.
She explicitly categorizes them as a terrorist insurgency.
She does.
Terrorist is a loaded word. Does she actually have historical receipts to back that up?
According to the text, yes. She cites specific campaigns of arson and bombings. She details the burning of the Orchid House at Kew Gardens in 1913.
Okay.
She also mentions the attempt to burn down the Prime Minister's house, Lloyd George.
So her argument is these weren't peaceful protests at all.
Right. She claims they were violent acts of coercion designed to inflict maximum economic damage.
Okay, so there was violence. But the detail in this chapter that really stuck out to me, and this feels incredibly relevant to today's cancel culture,
Yeah.
was the White Feather campaign. I had actually never heard of this before.
It is a crucial part of the author's point about the origin of social shaming. This happened during World War I.
Okay.
The suffragettes, specifically the Women's Social and Political Union, the WSPU, They pivoted from fighting the government to actively shaming men.
How did they do that?
They would go up to men in civilian clothesmen who were not in military uniform and physically hand them a white feather.
Which was a universal symbol of cowardice at the time, right?
Yeah. Exactly. In public, on the street, in front of their dates or their mothers. They were publicly shaming men into going to the trenches to die.
Yeah.
The book highlights what Riker sees as a profound hypocrisy here. Women, who were safe at home and completely protected from the draft, were using social shame to send men into the meat grinder of the Western Front.
It's essentially the weaponization of chivalry against the man himself.
Riker frames this as the prototype for modern cancellation. You shame the protector for not dying fast enough for you.
That is a wild perspective, and the book connects this gender war directly to political ideology.
Right.
Which brings us to the Marxist connection. Now, I know cultural Marxism is a term that gets thrown around a lot on the internet, often without any real definition.
Very true.
How does Riker connect those dots in Chapter 3?
She calls it the great bait and switch. She actually traces the lineage back to the Frankfurt School and thinkers like Herbert Marcuse.
For the listener who maybe isn't totally caught up on 20th century political theory, what exactly was the switch?
Well, the basic formula of classical Marxism is bourgeoisie versus proletariat.
The rich owners versus the working class.
Exactly. And the goal is a revolution. But the cultural Marxists realized that in the West, the working class was actually pretty happy.
They had cars.
They had cars, they had fridges, they had homes. They weren't going to revolt.
So the class war just failed.
Right. So, according to Riker, they swapped the variables. Instead of rich versus poor, they made it men versus women.
They just took the exact same framework.
They took the oppressor versus oppressed framework and applied it to gender.
And what does the book say is the ultimate goal of that swap?
The destruction of the nuclear family. Citing Friedrich Engels, Riker argues that the family is the primary unit of capitalism. If you destroy the family, you remove the father as the provider.
And who steps in to fill that void?
The state. It is a power transfer.
Yeah.
You break the loyalty to the patriarch, so the loyalty automatically shifts to the bureaucrat.
Which, from her perspective, explains why the government seems to be the third parent in every household now.
That's the argument, yes.
Okay, so that is the history and the politics. But the part of this book that really felt personal, the part that I think will heavily resonate with a lot of guys listening to this, is the psychological warfare aspect. We have to talk about damseling.
Chapter 6, Weaponized Tears.
Now, Riker actually brings some hard science to the table here. She cites a study from the Weizmann Institute. What exactly did they find?
It is fascinating and a little disturbing. The study claims that female emotional tears contain specific chemosignals.
Wait, actual airborne chemical signals?
Actual chemical signals. And when men smell these tears, their testosterone levels drop by about 11%.
So it's literal chemical warfare.
Biologically speaking, yes. Riker argues this is an evolutionary hack. In the wild, it lowered male aggression and triggered a caretaking response. It made the man stop fighting and start protecting.
But how does she say that translates to the modern world?
Riker argues it's now used to bypass logic and due process. It's a biological override switch. And she points to the Believe All Women movement as the institutionalization of this biological reflex.
And the case study she uses? Well, we all watched it.
The Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard trial.
Right.
The book frames this as the exact moment the mask slipped.
How so? Like, what does she mean by that?
She claims it showed how the damseling tactic is used to completely destroy a man's reputation without evidence. But because the trial was televised for the first time, men saw the mechanism in real time. They saw the weaponization of victimhood on a global stage.
But here is the trap, right? If you try to fight back against this, or even if you just try to be stoic and ignore it, you get hit with the toxic masculinity label.
And this is what Chapter 7 calls the double bind. This is a really important concept for the listener to grasp. A double bind is a psychological situation where you lose no matter what choice you make.
Walk us through the choices men have, according to the book.
If you are strong, stoic, and aggressive traditional male traits, you are labeled toxic. You are deemed a danger to society.
Right.
But if you are weak, emotional, or vulnerable, you are despised. You're called a soy boy.
Nobody respects the weak man.
Exactly. Riker points out the paradox here. Society demands the toxic shield, meaning rough men with guns, to protect the very safe spaces that feminists are demanding.
So they want the protection of the king, but they want to strip him of his sword until the exact moment they need it.
That's exactly how she frames it.
Speaking of stripping away masculinity, let's look at where the book claims this indoctrination begins. The war on boys and education. This part of the text was incredibly intense.
Chapter 11, the indoctrination interface.
It really feels like she's arguing schools have completely pathologized normal male behavior.
They have. Riker uses the Pop-Tart pistol incident to illustrate this point.
Remind the listeners what happened there.
This was the case of Josh Welch, a young boy in elementary school. He chewed a pastry, a breakfast Pop-Tart, into the shape of a gun.
He didn't even have a weapon.
He had a pastry. And he was suspended from school.
Suspended for his imagination.
Riker argues it illustrates a zero-tolerance policy for male nature. But it goes much deeper than just suspensions. She discusses what she calls the Ritallinization of boys.
The medical angle.
Right. The book argues that high energy, competitiveness, and drive, which are standard biological settings for young males, are systematically being diagnosed as ADHD.
And the goal of that?
The goal, according to Riker, is to medicate boys until they behave exactly like girls in a classroom setting. Sitting still, facing forward, quiet, and compliant.
She basically frames it as chemical castration of the male spirit before puberty even hits.
And then those boys grow up and enter the workforce, only to walk into what the book calls the corporate cock trap.
Chapter 10. And this is where she brings up the HR departments.
She describes HR as the Stasi of the workplace.
The secret police.
Exactly. She claims they aren't there to help you. They are there strictly to enforce ideological compliance. If you deviate from the narrative, you are purged.
But here's the twist that Riker points out, which I found fascinating. This system isn't even making women happy.
No, that is the paradox of declining female happiness. Riker pulls data showing that despite having all the degrees, the corporate jobs, the liberation women are statistically more miserable today than they were 40 years ago.
So the virus destroys the host's happiness too.
Everyone loses. That's the core argument.
It feels like she's painting a picture where there is no escape. You go from the classroom indoctrination straight to the HR surveillance state. But the place where the book says men really get crushed, where the rubber meets the road, is the legal system, specifically the family courts.
The family court fiefdom. That's chapter 12.
The stats she pulls on this are wild.
They are. First, she looks at the initiation rate. Women initiate 70 to 80% of divorces.
70 to 80%.
And Riker argues this is because the system financially incentivizes them to leave. It acts as a cash-out mechanism.
And the system is rigged against the man from the start. She talks about the Duluth model. What is that exactly?
The Duluth model is a protocol used by law enforcement in domestic disputes. It operates on the ideological premise that domestic violence is a patriarchal tool used by men to control women.
So it's ideological from the ground up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Therefore, in almost any domestic dispute, the man is presumed to be the aggressor by default.
So you are guilty until proven innocent.
Essentially. And financially, the book describes men in this system as tax livestock. You become nothing more than a wallet for the state and the ex-wife.
And she ties this injustice directly to what's fueling the marriage strike and movements like Men Going Their Own Way or MGTOW.
Right. Men are looking at the legal contract of marriage and realizing it is a fundamentally bad deal.
And it gets even darker when you look at the biological reality of paternity. This was the absolute red pill moment for me reading this book, the cuckoldry cataclysm.
Chapter 8. This is where the biological imperative clashes violently with the legal system. Riker cites paternity fraud rates.
Generally, people think this is rare, right? Like 1 to 3%.
That's the common perception. But she points to data from specific urban clusters where that number hits 30%.
30%. That is almost 1 in 3 men raising a kid that isn't biologically theirs.
And the law often forces them to keep paying anyway.
How is that legally possible?
Riker cites California Family Code, Section 7611. Essentially, if you have been acting as the father, if you signed the birth certificate and lived in the house, you are the father in the eyes of the court, regardless of what the DNA says.
That is insane.
Riker frames this as the literal theft of a man's genetic legacy. You are working your entire life to raise another man's DNA.
Which is why the author demands mandatory paternity testing at birth.
She argues it is the only way to ensure the contract is valid.
Then you have the other side of the biological coin, what she calls the abortion of this.
Chapter 9. She cites 63 million abortions since 1973.
That number is staggering.
And the book connects this directly to demographic collapse. Fertility rates are crashing below replacement levels. It's at 1.6 right now. Riker argues this is the woke mind virus actively causing the host to sterilize itself.
And we see the cultural result of that misplaced maternal instinct, right? The pet mom phenomenon.
Exactly. The maternal instinct doesn't disappear, it just gets displaced. It's poured into fur babies instead of a human lineage.
So we have painted a pretty bleak picture here based on Riker's analysis. The institutions are captured, the laws are rigged against men, and basic biology is being denied. But the book doesn't just leave the reader in the pit. There is a specific solution proposed.
The traditional turn, that is chapter 16.
What does that look like? Is she just saying go back to the 1950s?
Not exactly. It is about rejecting the virus actively. Riker advocates for strategic homemaking. She says couples must reject the dual income trap.
Because she argues the dual income model actually lowers happiness and wealth.
Right. Because you are paying twice the taxes and outsourcing your entire life to childcare and conveniences.
But there is a physical component for men, too, in this chapter.
A huge one. She tells men to actively reclaim their testosterone, lift heavy weights, get physically strong, and she talks extensively about avoiding plastics and soy.
Because of the xenoestrogens.
Right. Chemicals that mimic estrogen in the body and lower testosterone. She wants men to physically rebuild their biology to resist the soyification of the modern world.
And she points to real communities that are making this work today.
She does. She mentions places like Cache Valley, Utah, or groups known as the Radical Homemakers. These are communities that have intentionally returned to traditional gender roles, and they report much higher happiness and stability. It is about building a fortress against the cultural chaos.
And this brings up a massive concept in the book, the archetype of the patriarch. She argues he isn't the villain, he is an absolute necessity.
Chapter 14, the necessity of the patriarch. Riker uses a really powerful historical contrast here to make her point. The HMS Birkenhead versus the Costa Concordia.
The Birkenhead was the ship where the soldiers stood on deck to die, right?
Correct. It sank in 1852. There were not enough lifeboats. So the men stood in strict military formation on the sinking deck so the women and children could get to safety. Wow. That is the archetype of the king. Male disposability for the protection of the vulnerable.
Versus the Costa Concordia,
where the captain famously tripped and fell into a lifeboat, fleeing the ship while the passengers were still trapped on board.
All right.
The book argues that when society demonizes the patriarch, when you actively try to kill the king archetype, you don't get a feminist utopia. You get the Costa Concordia. You get absolute chaos.
That is a powerful image, the idea that civilization fundamentally relies on that order.
It relies on men who are willing to be the shield.
So, bringing this all together, what does this mean for you listening right now? The book's final analysis is that the current system is essentially a death cult. It is eating its own young and actively destroying the family unit.
And her perspective is that the only way out is a hard return to biological reality. The author puts it very starkly. You can either continue to apologize for your existence, or you can reclaim your role as the architect of reality.
That is the provocative thought we really want to leave you with today to mull over on your own. Are you an apologist, or are you ready to be an architect?
If you are ready to stop apologizing, you really need the full manual.
Absolutely. We have only barely scratched the surface of the data, the legal codes, and the history in this thing. You need to go to Amazon Kindle or Google Playbooks right now and buy Manipulation, Deceit, and Menses by Sophie Marie Eve Riker. It is vital to support this kind of deep analysis.
And for the ongoing breakdown of how this mind virus mutates, you need to follow the author directly. Go to @ConradRiker on Substack.
Do it right now. Reclaim your reality. And please don't forget to like and subscribe to the show so we can keep diving deep into the sources they want hidden. We will see you on the next one.